Hi, I'm Nicole, and for this presentation I've chosen to do a bit of a video diary presentation. The diary is intended to explain who I feel I am as a teacher, what kind of professional I intend to be in my teaching career, and how it is I got to be here. Mockler explains that to articulate one's own professional identity, you are required to construct yourself in your own mind as a teacher. That's something that I've found up until now, the very end of my degree, to be quite difficult to do. As a mature age student, becoming a teacher has been a long journey for me. I hope that this presentation depicts how valuable my life, study and placement experiences have been in my journey. Recently I've completed my final teaching placement in a foundation classroom of a small public school. When reflecting on this placement experience, I found that I was finally able to define the type of teacher I believe I am and will continue to aspire to be. I'm a teacher who loves to work collaboratively with my colleagues and have students work collaboratively. I strive to foster inquiry experiences for students and, where possible, take learning outside of the classroom. I am nurturing of students of all ages and am able to adapt that according to the group needs of whom I'm working with. I absolutely love children's literature and incorporate that as much as possible into my lesson planning. And ultimately, I'm a teacher who strives to facilitate an inclusive classroom which has a real welcoming community feel to it. A teacher who is respectful of diversity and celebrates the individual talents, personalities and experiences each student brings to the classroom. I am a huge believer that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to education, and this is reflected in my philosophy and my approach to teaching and learning. I'll go into these points a little further over the next few slides. Initially, when I began my studies here at Monash, the words group assignment were enough to make my blood run cold. I found working as part of a group generally meant that I would be waiting on others to share the workload, adhere to due dates, and sometimes even to communicate with the group at all. However, when I started attending my placement experiences, I began to see that collaboration between colleagues on a professional level is a really great way to share ideas, find motivation to try something new, help you to see something from a different perspective, and importantly, potentially lessen your individual workload to help find that healthy work and life balance. Working as part of a team or a teaching team is beneficial for students also, keeping in mind that not all children learn in the same way. Providing them the opportunity to engage with other teachers throughout the school year is a fantastic way to ensure they are exposed to differing teaching styles and strategies. Throughout my time in placement, I was able to facilitate lessons which were guided by the children's inquisitive natures. This led to maths lessons in the sandpit, science experiences in the kitchen, and literacy lessons through movement in the outdoors. In order for these lessons to be successful, I found it really important to know the students. I was able to determine what the students were interested in, what engaged them, and whether hands-on experiences were even appropriate at all. I endeavour to offer learning experiences which are guided by the inquiries of students as often as possible, and I take that learning outside of the classroom to further engage and excite the students about their learning. I found this strategy is an excellent way to ensure that the curriculum content is made relevant to the students' lives, which further aids the teaching and learning process. Now, reading has been a hobby of mine since I was about 5 years old. I love literature and love to bring it to life for children through discussion and learning experiences. A personal goal of mine is to encourage as many children as possible to find a love for literature. Therefore, I use picture storybooks and more mature pieces in my planning as much as possible. In the slide here are just some of my personal favourites which I've used in the classroom and are regular nighttime readers at home with my sons. I know reading to be an excellent way to tap into a student's creativity, but I also acknowledge that it is not loved by all, so would be sensitive to that when planning for my students. Being an inclusive teacher is something that is really important to me. Throughout my experiences as a pre-service teacher, having opted to study units such as educating students with special needs and gifted education, and then subsequent placement experiences, it is undeniable that classrooms are filled to the brim of diverse, rich and colourful personalities whom all learn differently, both academically and socially. The concept of inclusive teaching is the reason I chose to return to Monash to complete a teaching degree. I'll explain this a bit further later on in the presentation. So this is me back in the late 80s when I was a primary school student myself. I think I was probably in grade 5 or 6 for this photo. Way back then, I already thought of myself as a teacher. I'm the oldest of 5 children, and my siblings tell stories of me playing school at home, having them do worksheets whilst they referred to me as Miss Jackson. My experience of primary school was an extremely rewarding one. My prep teacher is still to this day my favourite teacher, and she still mentors me throughout my pre-service teacher studies. I have rich memories of participating in school productions, exciting maths projects which asked us to spend $1,000,000, and sitting and listening to another teacher read to us each day the story of the secret of Nim. Somehow, Mr. Matthews made the rats of Nim come to life in the classroom. He had such a special way of engaging his students with literature. By the time I finished primary school, I was left wanting more of the experience and promised myself and my favourite teacher that I would definitely be back teaching as soon as I could. Lordy, as cited by Mockler, explained that our personal experiences and perceptions of school, teaching and learning holds implications for the way we see ourselves as teachers and our teaching approaches. You can see how this is relevant when considering my experiences, as I've just discussed, and the way in which I identified myself as a teacher at the beginning of the presentation. So let's flash forward a few years now. These guys are my sons. Bailey on the left there is 12, Kyan on the right is 10, and the little guy in the middle is Tate, who's 5, and he's off to school next year. Before I had my children, when I was fresh out of high school, I completed my first year of the Bachelor of Early Childhood Education. I really didn't enjoy it. I had built up in my mind throughout my years at primary and secondary school that I was going to be a teacher and it was going to be fabulous. The reality of placement in childcare centres and kindergartens, however, turned me right off the idea of teaching. I felt as though these teachers were glorified babysitters and failed to see the value of all the hard work that they were doing. At 18 years of age, I really didn't get it. So much so that I deferred from my course and went out to work in the world of retail. I became a mum at the tender age of 20, and for the next 8 years I raised my 3 sons. I started to see things differently. I was astounded that my husband and I could create 3 sons who were all so diverse in nature and learning ability. It fascinated me to see that Bailey could lose himself in a good book and go missing for hours at a time while he finished it, while Kyan can choreograph entire concerts from start to finish, planning and executing the whole thing by himself. And little Tate, well, we're still getting to know his learning style, but he's growing to be a sensitive little soul who somehow manages to make us laugh every single day. The diversity just within our small family blew me away, and it was when my older 2 had settled into school that I started to become aware managing diversity in the classroom can be quite challenging for a teacher. My will to become an inclusive teacher was further strengthened when one of my sons started to struggle at school. Academically, he was succeeding in all areas, however socially it was apparent he needed some extra support. His interpersonal skills were somewhat delayed, and it was his classroom teacher in grade 2 who suggested to us that we consider the possibility of Asperger's syndrome. We went through the diagnosis process and with our paediatrician's guidance determined that whilst our son had many traits that could be attributed to the syndrome, he also had many other traits which were not common to those on the spectrum. Things like understanding and using sarcasm and having empathy for others, for example. Together we decided against a diagnosis, but are still very aware of his additional needs and thus kept learning more about children on the spectrum so that we may offer him relevant support as needed, and I now use this experience and knowledge in my teaching life. Part of the way we continue to do this is via a community Facebook page, which I'll briefly show you now. It's called Nobody to Play With, The Road to Understanding Asperger's Syndrome. And initially it was a way for my husband and I to ask like-minded parents about their experiences and look for advice and things like that. It ended up turning into a page where other parents look for support, and we just posted things that were relevant to his day, and people were able to relate to that and have discussions and things like that on there. It has almost 700 people following it, which is really cool, and it's a good way to keep in the know about what's going on out there as far as parents go. So it's very useful for me also as a teacher. So, as you can see, my personal story as to how it is I became the teacher I identify myself to be started many years ago. The journey has been influenced by many factors: my own personal primary school experience, my experiences as a parent, and the opportunities I've been given when working at placement schools and throughout my studies. I have no doubt my teacher identity will transform many times as I gain more experience in the field, but I'm confident that what I've presented here is the core or the foundation of who I aim to be when I'm in the classroom. I'll leave you here with my written teaching philosophy, which has been depicted throughout my story. I'll just flick over to that, and you'll see it's very much what I've just been presenting to you. So it's throughout my pre-service teaching experiences, I've developed personal beliefs, values, and a philosophy which guides my teaching approach. My ambition is to become a supportive, inspiring, and motivating primary school teacher. I believe a teacher who is able to empathise with children, who respects them and believes that each is unique and has the ability to achieve, becomes a memorable teacher. I aspire to be a teacher who can confidently say I have made a positive impact in the lives of my students. My aim is that my classroom will inspire a feeling of community, where students are accepted for who they are and where they are in terms of their educational development. I believe that an inclusive environment such as this aids successful learning, especially when it is nurtured through collaboration between a teacher, students, families, and local communities. I place importance on building positive relationships between myself and my students, and I understand that these types of relationships are built on mutual respect and trust. A positive relationship between a teacher and their students assists in creating a learning environment which is positive but is also safe and full of laughter, a fun place for children to learn, blossom, and feel welcome. In this space, I will work with students to promote positive self-image, confidence, and assist them to uncover their own potential. To successfully implement an inclusive environment it is important to acknowledge that students bring so much to the classroom by way of culture, gender, and experience. I aim to facilitate learning experiences which share students' diversity in my teaching practice so that everybody learns from one another rather than implementing the traditional teacher instructing students model. Through successfully creating an inclusive classroom environment, building positive relationships with both students and their families, and approaching teaching as facilitation rather than instruction, I hope to aid students' success in all learning domains, inclusive of social and emotional development. In my eyes, there is no greater success for a teacher than witnessing their students succeed at something, and facilitating the learning and development of these successes is an achievement like no other.